Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of the Harvey family. Bryan Taba Harvey, 49, was a local icon who rose to fame in the 1980s as the lead singer and songwriter of the indie band House of Freaks. Although he and his musical partner Johnny Hott went their separate ways professionally in the 1990s, they remained close friends. A dedicated musician, Bryan performed on stage for the final time on New Year's Eve, unaware that it would be the last night of his life. On the other hand, Kathryn Grabinsky, 39, found success as co-owner of World of Mirth, a popular toy store in Richmond's Carytown district. She was an artist who pursued various endeavors, including painting sets for community theater, working as a pastry chef, and waitressing. Kathryn had an older sister, Shelley Grabinsky, and was also the half-sister of actor Steven Kulp, known for his roles in TV shows such as The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, as well as various films. Bryan and Kathryn's paths crossed at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Kathryn worked and Bryan frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, Bryan and Kathryn got married. The House of Freaks then released an album featuring a song called I Got Happy, which was dedicated to Kathryn. The couple had 2 daughters. Their first daughter, Stella, was born in 1996. After becoming a father, Bryan realized that having children helped him find meaning in life and the importance of keeping hope for his children's future. Their second daughter, Ruby, was born in 2001. While working in the computer department of the Henrico County school system, Bryan continued to pursue his passion for music. Meanwhile, Kathryn started her own business, opening a unique toy and gift store called World of Mirth in the Carytown neighborhood. The store was designed to be a welcoming space for parents and children to spend time together, and children are free to play with the available toys. Bryan Harvey's family lives in a quiet, quaint neighborhood south of Richmond. Their 2-story red brick house was surrounded by large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered gardens. They had a cozy family room in the basement. The family was well respected and loved in the community, and it seemed no one had any ill will towards them. On New Year's Day, 2006, Bryan, his wife Kathryn, and their 2 daughters, Stella and Ruby, were preparing for a busy day. They were hosting a barbecue lunch for friends and family, a tradition they enjoyed every year on this day. They woke up early to get everything ready. That Sunday morning, Bryan went outside to collect the newspaper, absorbed in the front-page news. He didn't lock the door when he came back in, which wasn't unusual for them, especially on party days when friends would be arriving. The neighborhood was considered safe, so they didn't think much of it. However, on that day, Bryan was unaware that some criminals were secretly lurking nearby. Kathryn was busy in the kitchen, preparing cookies for the guests who were expected to arrive soon. Suddenly, she heard voices coming from the living room and thought that some guests had arrived early. But when she went to check, she was shocked to see 2 strangers instead of familiar faces. Later, Bryan, Kathryn, and their young daughter Ruby were ordered to go downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the night at a friend's house, had not yet arrived home. Once the family was in the small room, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to tie them up. The intruders told them that as long as they cooperated, no one would get hurt while they searched the house. Just as the intruders were starting to ransack the house, someone knocked on the front door at around 10 a.m. The leader of the intruders untied Kathryn and told her to answer the door. However, he warned her that if she tried to escape or ask for help, her daughter and husband would be killed. Kathryn was in a difficult situation. Stella was about to arrive, and if she answered the door, she would put her daughter in danger. On the other hand, if she didn't answer the door, the intruder might get angry and hurt her family. In the end, Kathryn decided that it was best to cooperate, so she opened the door. Stella suddenly ran past Kathryn and into the playroom, where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Kathryn quickly intervened, stopping Stella's friend from following her. Kyron Perkinson, the friend's mother, later expressed her surprise at Kathryn's unusual behavior. When Perkinson asked Kathryn how she was feeling, Kathryn said she was not well. Then, she made a circular motion with her hand, mimicking a gun and pointing it at her head. This abruptly ended the conversation, and Kathryn shut the door. This strange gesture would later trouble Perkinson, wondered if Kathryn was trying to convey something. She wondered if Kathryn being monitored by the intruders. Perkinson left, intending to return later for a party. All 4 members of the Harvey family were now inside the house. Kathryn went back to the basement and found Stella had been securely tied up alongside the rest of the family. Everyone was caught helpless and defenseless. Chaos broke out unexpectedly and without any prior indication. The assailant revealed a knife taken from the Harveys' kitchen and began slashing the family members' throats. Angry that he had to wait so long for them to die, he ordered his accomplices to hit them hard on the head. However, the accomplice refused. The assailant then grabbed a claw hammer and ruthlessly struck the family members repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Kathryn Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants set the room on fire using wine as an accelerant to conceal evidence of their crimes. As they escaped from the scene, they ate a plate of freshly baked cookies from the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and other items. They rushed out and entered the getaway vehicle parked outside, where a woman was waiting. She was related to one of the robbers and had been on lookout duty during the incident. They quickly departed, leaving the scene as quietly as they had arrived. Later that day, around 1:30 p.m., Johnny arrived at the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was met with a thick cloud of smoke and a strong burning smell. Alarmed, he alerted the neighbors. They quickly called 911. Firefighters arrived at the scene and put out the fire. However, they soon discovered 4 bodies in the smoldering basement. Despite initial appearances, investigators determined that the fire did not cause the deaths. Instead, they found evidence of a more sinister cause. The investigation was now treating the incident as a murder case. The scene was so heartbreaking that it left even the police and medical staff, who were accustomed to dealing with traumatic situations, utterly stunned and shocked. Some were even seen crying openly. The discovery that parents were made to watch their children being brutally killed, and that children were also forced to witness the brutal deaths of their parents, was especially devastating. Autopsies revealed that Bryan and Kathryn died from blunt force trauma to the head. Stella's death was caused by a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was still alive when the fire started. Ruby's cause of death was stab wounds to the neck and back, resulting in her death. The authorities immediately launched an investigation into the murders, but they had little evidence to work with. To gather more information, they appealed to the public for assistance. This approach proved successful when, on January 6, a woman named Latoya P.Y. contacted the police, requesting a welfare check on her friend, 21 years old Ashley Basil Tucker. Latoya expressed concerns that Ashley's boyfriend, 29 years old Ree Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29 years old Ricky Javon Gray, were involved in the Harvey family's murder. Gray, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was reportedly the one in charge. The investigation took a significant turn when Latoya revealed that the 2 men had hidden evidence of their crimes at her residence. She disclosed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harvey family as its wallpaper. Given the extensive news coverage of the Harvey case, it was clear that the laptop belonged to the family. Latoya revealed information about the plan that Ashley, Gray and Dandridge had devised to rob Ashley's parents. According to the plan, Ashley would pretend to be a hostage, allowing Dandridge and Gray to extort money from the Persile Tucker, Ashley's stepfather. This would make Ashley appear innocent, even though LaToya knew about the plan and was offered a role in it. However, LaToya became suspicious of the group and declined to participate. Later, when LaToya asked Gray and Dandridge about Ashley's whereabouts, they gave a cryptic response, saying, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This increased LaToya's concerns, and she contacted the police. The information she provided was crucial in helping investigators connect the dots. When investigators arrived at the residence where Ashley lived with her mother, Mary Baskerville Tucker, and stepfather, Persile Tucker, they found a gruesome scene. Inside the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all three victims, who had been subjected to a brutal and violent death, similar to the Harvey family. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats slit. Duct tape was wrapped tightly around their heads, causing additional suffering. Mary and Persile had deep neck lacerations, and Persile had a sock inserted into his throat. Ashley was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The cause of death for all three victims was determined to be suffocation and torture. The police believed that the killer's primary motivation was a thrill-seeking desire, rather than any obvious personal benefit, so they worked together to catch them before they could hurt anyone else. Similar to the Harveys, Persile and Mary live a quiet life with no known enemies. Percy works as a forklift driver, while Mary works for a cleaning service company. Their peaceful life was shattered by their daughter's betrayal, leading to the tragic death of a couple enjoying their golden years. Investigators quickly discovered a crucial connection between the Harvey family's case and the Tucker family's case. Ashley was found wearing Kathryn's wedding band, which had been missing and taken from Kathryn. With this revelation, urgent action was necessary to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further harm. Authorities tracked Gray and Dandridge back to their home state of Pennsylvania and apprehended them in Philadelphia on January 7. Dandridge claimed that Gray planned the murders and he just followed orders. When faced with these accusations, Gray provided explicit and disturbing details of the two family massacres, explaining that financial gain was the primary motivation behind their actions. Notably, during the Harvey family murders, he was under the influence of an illicit substance called PCP, also known as phencyclidine or angel dust. This potent drug is known to cause auditory and visual hallucinations and often leads to aggressive behavior. During his confession, Gray showed no emotion, maintaining a chilling stare. His indifference to the lives he took led investigators to view him as a ruthless and heartless individual. Additionally, it was discovered that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was found in a shallow grave in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple, married for 6 months, lived together in a house owned by Trevor's family. They shared the home with Gray's nephew, Dandridge. Trevor's parents reported that the couple frequently had intense arguments. On the day Trevor's body was discovered, Gray had claw marks on his forearm. Initially, neither Gray nor Dandridge were considered suspects by the Washington police. Trevor's mother, Manna Squires, claimed that the police thought Trevor's death was due to a drug overdose, which led to a slow investigation. Trevor's death initially raised suspicions, but a thorough investigation did not occur until Gray confessed to the crime in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a violent assault occurred outside a home in Arlington. 2 men, later identified as Gray and Dandridge, attacked 26-year-old Ryan Key in front of his parents' house. The assault left Ryan with severe injuries, including stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms. He spent 2 weeks in a coma due to the near-fatal attack. Additionally, he permanently lost the use of his right arm. Gray and Dandridge faced multiple charges related of the Tucker's family killings. Gray was charged with 5 counts of capital murder, while Dandridge faced 3 counts of murder. Despite initially admitting to their involvement, both men pleaded not guilty. Gray's 6-month trial concluded with a guilty verdict on all counts. He received a life sentence for the murders of Bryan and Kathryn Harvey. The court also sentenced him to death for the brutal murders of Stella and Ruby. Following Gray's conviction in September 2006, Dandridge chose to accept a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in December 2006. Gray also faced charges in Culpeper County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old mother of 3 who was found shot and hanged in her burning home. Gray pleaded not guilty, but the charge was later suspended due to conflicting evidence on June 4, 2008. Over the next 9 years, Gray's lawyers filed multiple appeals. They argued that Gray's traumatic childhood had affected his mental capacity. However, the Supreme Court rejected his case in 2016. As a result, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On the scheduled date, with all appeals exhausted, Gray was put to death by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. Meanwhile, Dandridge remains in prison at Sussex 2 State Prison. The Harvey family's brutal murders sent shockwaves of horror and grief through the community. Over 1,400 people attended their memorial service, expressing condolences and sorrow outside Kathryn's store. Flowers, dolls, and candles formed a poignant tribute along the curb outside the red brick house. The candles, lit by children, remained glowing for weeks. Kathryn's brother Kulp described the murders as a devastating blow that felt endless. He spoke about the pain of thinking about the family's final hours, saying that everyone was trying to move forward. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan grew up in Canada, in a large family with his parents, Bill and Susan. Bill works at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and spends time on his many interests, including sports, yoga, and psychology, which help balance family life. In addition, his wife, Susan, is able to manage the household, take care of the children, and keep their Toronto home clean. Passers-by often stop to admire the family's beautiful and blooming garden. Although Susan loved her sons equally, but Brett seemed to be less criticized because he was generally well-behaved. Brett was very clever at getting out of difficult situations, which gave the impression that he was a good boy, although this was not always the case. Brett was extremely popular in school, with everyone wanting to be his friend or at least be able to greet him by name, just like his older brothers. After high school, Brett attended university, driven by a desire to surpass his brother's achievements. To earn extra money, he placed an ad in the local newspaper, offering to paint houses and fences for Toronto residents. At first, his business was quite successful and Brett felt proud, especially with his first income. His mother, Susan, was thrilled and often cited him as a role model for others. However, things took a turn when Brett dropped out of college to focus full-time on his paint business. Without a degree, he had to work full-time as a paint salesman, which deprived him of formal education and exposed him to paint fumes on a regular basis. For a while, Brett felt confident and superior to his brothers, but this soon changed. After a couple of years, his brothers, Christopher and Leland, graduated and landed jobs in their specialized fields. Christopher worked for the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. As they established their careers and moved out of their parents' home, Brett's power began to diminish significantly. To save money on rent, Brett continued to live with his parents and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. Brett's financial situation grew more dire over time. By 2007, when he turned 26, his debt had surged to more than $60,000. This burden led to depression, but despite his inner turmoil, Brett maintained a cheerful exterior, always willing to lend a helping hand and participate in volunteer work. His friends and acquaintances were unaware of the immense emotional pain he was hiding. Brett faced a severe situation on October 28, 2007. With winter approaching, he had no orders. Left with no other choice, Brett wore his oldest clothes, including a hat, a long sweater his brother had given him and a long scarf his mother had knitted. It was the first time he had worn the scarf, but it was finally coming in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Brett stood in line at the bank, holding a thick folder and favoring his right foot as he waited his turn. When the bank employee called him forward, he approached her and spoke in a hushed tone. He calmly informed her that he had a gun and urged her to remove all the cash from the register and hand it over to him. He warned her that if she didn't comply, he would start shooting, and she would be the first person he would harm. She, with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett quietly exited the building, careful not to draw the attention of the guardians. Once outside, Brett took off running. He counted the money he had stolen from the bank, but it wasn't much, just over $1,000. To pay off his debt, he calculated that he would need to rob about 60 more banks, a crazy idea, but to him it seemed like the only option. For the first few days, Brett was fearful that the police would somehow catch up with him, so he avoided going home. He told his mother he had a job in a neighboring town and spent his nights sleeping in his car. Periodically, Brett would sneak back to his house to check if there were any police cars staking out the area. Finding none, he felt reassured that he was in the clear. The first robbery was followed by a second, then a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett changed his clothes, opting for second-hand or discarded items he found in the trash. He would burn the used clothes after each crime. Brett also bought a beard from a costume party store to further disguise himself. Brett committed a string of bank robberies in the Toronto area, and his distinctive beard made a lasting impression on the witnesses. His total intended theft across all instances never exceeded $3,000. Brett's luck ran out when police spotted his car on surveillance cameras and followed him home. They tracked his exact route, gathering details from various vehicles to prove his guilt. Further inquiries yielded little new information, so the authorities closely tracked a particular road in an attempt to shed light on the case. Their patience and hard work finally paid off. They found a potential lead. This person of interest, a bearded man, was found walking alone near a bank and was promptly detained by the officer for further investigation. Brett was under investigation for 7 months before being charged with robbery with a firearm, despite having a gun permit. Notably, he never actually carried a gun or any other weapon during the robberies. He didn't even bring a kitchen knife. Initially, he was charged with 19 counts, but after multiple appeals filed by him and his family, only 8 of those counts were upheld. Upon being given the opportunity to apply for parole, Brett submitted a petition. In it, he asked the authorities to consider the circumstances that led him to commit the crimes, including severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and a significant amount of debt. He also reiterated that he had never intended to harm anyone during the robberies, as evidenced by his lack of weapons. His remarks were taken into account, but as a condition of his potential parole, he was required to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive impact on Brett. During his time in prison, he had lost touch with his family, but he took the initiative to reconnect with them. The positive changes in Brett were noticed by the commissioners, and on November 24, 2010, he was released from prison. However, the freedom he had fought so hard for turned out to be more challenging than he had anticipated. Prior to his career as a painter, Brett struggled with deep emotional pain that weighed heavily on him. He had previously been a bank robber and served time in prison, which damaged his reputation. As a result, no company would hire him, and even those who initially hired him for house painting services would cancel once they discovered his true identity. The neighbors, who once admired Susan's garden and visited frequently, now spread unpleasant rumors about the family. The Brett family quickly sold their house and relocated to Scarborough. Susan started a new garden, and Brett found a job with a trading company. Although the pay was low, his parents helped him financially to rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist, who consistently advised him to maintain a strong connection with his family. Brett's life took a turn for the better when he met Kristen Baxter in September 2011. Kristen was an amazing person who had her own apartment with a stunning sea view. She was also into sports, which helped her stay in shape. What Brett appreciated most about her was that she didn't care about his past. They enjoyed traveling together, including a trip to Australia. Brett's parents were thrilled to see their son in a happy relationship and were confident that Kristen would encourage him to reach his full potential. However, just when everything was going well, tragedy struck. Brett's father passed away, leaving him in shock and sending him into a depressive state. As a result, Brett started visiting his psychologist more frequently to cope with his emotions. Brett was juggling two responsibilities: supporting his mother financially and nurturing his relationship with Kristen. They were both young adults, eager to build a stronger and more significant relationship with each other. Brett fell deeply in love with Kristen and decided to carry out an important plan. He had some savings and, after discussing his plans with his mother, decided to propose to Kristen with a ring. His mother supported his decision and gave him money to buy a ring. Although Kristen didn't need an expensive gift, Brett chose a gold ring with a large diamond to make the proposal special. Kristen happily accepted his proposal. As they began planning their wedding, Brett agreed with Kristen's decisions, but he was worried about the high costs and how they would affect his job. Brett found a job opening at a large technology company on the internet and applied for it. He updated his resume and submitted it, and was even invited for an interview, which he successfully passed. As a result, he was offered the job and was thrilled. He eagerly shared the news with his fiancée and mother, and asked them for money to buy an expensive suit for work. His mother agreed to help him, and he purchased the suit. However, just as Brett was about to start his new job, the company called him to inform him that they had to withdraw their offer. The security department had discovered his past criminal record, and the company could no longer hire him. This news was devastating for Brett, and his mood plummeted. He felt like giving up on his job search and education, wondering why he was wasting his time applying for jobs that he would never get due to his past mistakes. He decided that it would be better to use the money his mother and brothers had given him for something else. Brett had dropped out of university, but he didn't tell his family or his counselor. To maintain the illusion of success, Brett would wear a suit and tie, then change into casual clothes on the way to his job as a house painter. He would tell his relatives that he worked in an office. To further deceive his loved ones, Brett would post fake photos on social media, pretending to be at work or attending business events. He would also fake phone calls, making it seem like he was busy with work-related issues. Brett's family had no idea that he was hiding the truth about his life. As Brett's wedding to Kristen approached in September 2016, his deception reached new heights. He rented an expensive restaurant for the reception, which cost $100 per guest. His family was thrilled, believing that Brett had finally turned his life around with a prestigious job and a beautiful fiancée. However, Brett's deceptions became so overwhelming that he could no longer control his lies. Brett's wedding was just a month away, and he was struggling to cover the costs. He had been borrowing money from his mother, but when she could no longer help him, he pressured her to find a higher-paying job. Meanwhile, he was planning a bachelor party and had invited all his friends and brothers. Brett had a secret. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer for a technology company. When he finally confessed to his counselor, the counselor advised him to come clean to his mother. After much procrastination, Brett told his mother the truth, which devastated her. She bragged to everyone about her son's success. Brett's mother demanded that he tell his fiancée, Kristen, the truth, threatening to do so herself if he didn't. She also warned him that his brothers were aware of the situation and were on her side. However, Brett couldn't bring himself to confess to Kristen, despite knowing that the wedding was unlikely to happen due to his deception. With less than a month to go before the wedding, Brett remained silent, knowing that Kristen deserved to know the truth before it was too late. Brett was anxious about his mother revealing a potentially scandalous secret to his fiancée, Kristen. Every time her phone rang, he would tense up, holding his breath until he realized it wasn't his mother on the line, but rather one of Kristen's friends inquiring about her wedding plans. Eventually, Brett came up with a plan to silence his mother for good. As a convicted felon, Brett was prohibited from owning firearms. He decided to use a crossbow, a silent and deadly weapon, to carry out his plan. Interestingly, his late father had taught him how to shoot a crossbow at targets in their garden, a hobby that Brett had excelled at. Brett purchased the crossbow and arrows at a local sporting goods store and hid them in his garage, disguising them among construction debris. He also created a fake alibi by rigging his computer to automatically post pre-written comments on YouTube. He achieved this by attaching a spoon to a fan, which was connected to his computer. The fan was set to a timer, making it seem like Brett was actively using his computer at the time of the crime. Brett made everyone believe that he spent the whole day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. However, on the morning of August 25th, he had other plans. He put on disguising clothes that concealed his face, sneaked out of the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. He wants to eliminate anyone who might stand in the way of the peaceful life he and Kristen are building. When Brett arrived at his parents' house, his mother, Susan, was taken aback by his unexpected visit. She wasn't feeling well that day, but Brett persisted in persuading her not to reveal his plans to his future wife. Despite her poor health, Susan firmly refused to comply with Brett's demands. As he continued to pressure her, Brett's anger escalated, and Susan sensed that something was terribly wrong. She noticed the crazed look in her son's eyes and warned him that she had already called for help and that Christopher was on his way. Brett's anger reached a boiling point. He rushed to the garage, grabbed a crossbow, but his rage and adrenaline surge made him unable to aim properly. Instead, he used the crossbow's butt to bludgeon his mother. To ensure she was dead, he tightened a rope around her neck. After covering her body with plastic bags, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows, ready to face whoever was coming next. Brett's brother Christopher was lured into a trap by the suspect. As he entered the garage or the yard, Brett, who was hiding in the bushes, ambushed and shot Christopher in the neck. Christopher died shortly after the attack. Alexander, the youngest brother, was the next target. The suspect had also managed to lure him, but Alexander's outcome was different. Shot in the neck with an arrow, Alexander was critically injured but didn't die instantly. He screamed and cried for help as the attack took place. Throughout this violence, Leland remained asleep on the second floor, oblivious to the crime happening nearby and to the identity of the perpetrator, who was also a family member. It was Alexander's screams that startled Leland out of sleep, ran downstairs, and stumbled upon the horrific scene of his brother Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and Leland ended up in control, forcing Brett to back down. Leland immediately fled to a neighbor's house and called the police. With no means of escape, Brett remained in the house, realizing too late that his actions had disastrous consequences. In a desperate attempt to make amends, he composed a text message to Kristen, pleading for her forgiveness. Upon arriving at the scene, police officers found Brett, covered in blood, sitting beside his critically injured brother Alexander, who would later succumb to his injuries in the hospital. Brett voluntarily surrendered to the authorities, requesting to be handcuffed and taken into custody. During his confession, he revealed the location of his mother's body, hidden beneath packages in the garage, and acknowledged that she was beyond help. Brett admitted at the police station during the trial that he had not intended to kill Susan, but rather to scare her. In contrast, he had planned to kill Christopher and Alexander, who were witnesses to the crime. If they had not been present, they would still be alive. Brett attempted to justify his actions by citing his struggles with depression, but this did not lead to a more lenient sentence. Despite Brett's cooperation with the investigation and his voluntary confession, the judge imposed 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder. Brett will be eligible for parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor of the incident, has refused to speak to reporters, but he is well known in Toronto as the one who narrowly escaped the carnage. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind and loving young woman. Lindsay had a deep-seated need for connection and love. Her major misstep was that she misjudged her partner and invested herself in their toxic relationship. Lindsay was 17 when she found out she was pregnant. Growing up in a loving and supportive family, she had never expected to become a mother so young. Although she was emotionally mature. What made it even more difficult was that her boyfriend, whom she had been dating since she was 13, abandoned her as soon as he learned he was going to be a father. His sudden departure left Lindsay feeling both upset and scared. Lindsay was all too familiar with the physical and financial strains of motherhood. Her family, the Wilsons, were loving and close-knit, but they had often struggled to make ends meet. Despite their financial challenges, Lindsay's parents had always worked hard to provide for their children. When Lindsay met Mitchell, 5 months into her pregnancy, she felt like she had been given a rare gift. Mitchell, who was 20 years old at the time, was attentive, caring, and gentle. What impressed Lindsay most was that her pregnancy didn't deter him. Instead, he was eager to be involved and supportive. Mitchell told Lindsay that he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, raising her child as his own. To show his commitment, Mitchell began working overtime to ensure that Lindsay and their unborn child would not have to worry about anything. 20-year-old Mitchell was a true gentleman. He was attentive and loving to Lindsay, despite her delicate condition. In fact, Mitchell had fallen deeply in love with her at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, including raising her child as his own. At the time, Mitchell was earning a good income. However, when they announced their decision to get married, their parents were shocked. They felt that their 5-week relationship was too short to withstand the challenges and circumstances that came with marriage. Despite their concerns, Lindsay relatives noticed a positive change in her since being with Mitchell. She had regained her cheerfulness and good health. However, some of them found Mitchell's behavior to be a bit insincere. Nevertheless, no one interfered with their decision to get married, and instead chose to keep their doubts to themselves. The wedding took place in August 1995, surrounded by a small, intimate group of family and friends, mostly from the bride's side. The groom's side was noticeably underrepresented, with only his parents, a brother, and 2 friends in attendance. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, Lindsay relatives couldn't shake off their uneasy feelings about the union. However, Lindsay herself was over the moon, believing she had found her perfect match. As the evening wore on, their happiness was short-lived. A disagreement erupted, and the newlyweds' argument played out in front of their guests. The reason for Mitchell's outburst seemed trivial, and his reaction was disproportionately intense. The situation escalated, with Mitchell grasping Lindsay's hand and violently shaking her, leaving everyone in attendance stunned and uncomfortable. Mitchell appeared agitated and threatening, causing concern. When he calmed down, he apologized to everyone and made light of the situation, attributing his behavior to holiday stress. Although Lindsay didn't think much of the incident at the time and soon forgot about it, it was actually one of the warning signs of their toxic relationship. After getting married, Mitchell and Lindsay moved into an apartment in Southport, away from their parents. They started their life together and soon welcomed a baby girl named Robin. However, Lindsay soon discovered that her husband had a volatile temper, which cast a shadow over the joy of their new family. Mitchell's moods were unpredictable. One moment he was happy and joking, and the next, he would become aggressive and unreasonable. She thought she was maintaining a delicate balance at home, but in reality, she was giving in to his control. He dictates her every move and gets angry if she misses a phone call or doesn't pick up. Their arguments often ended with Mitchell begging for forgiveness and declaring his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had been restored, but their cycle of arguments became more and more intense. Lindsay struggled to recognize who she once loved. She frequently shared her concerns with her relatives, who urged her to leave the relationship and end her suffering. However, Lindsay found it difficult to acknowledge her mistake and admit defeat. Lindsay's relatives noticed that she often dwelled on memories of the past. Whenever her husband promised to change and return to his gentle and caring ways, Lindsay wanted to believe him and waited for him to fulfill his promises. Meanwhile, Mitchell's controlling behavior intensified. He restricted Lindsay's freedom, forbidding her from going out alone in the evenings and eventually requiring her to be accompanied by him at all times. Despite his possessiveness, Mitchell was seen with other women, sparking Lindsay's suspicions of infidelity. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her concerns, sharing an incident where a woman visited their home, unaware that Mitchell was married. This revelation led to another argument, which escalated into physical violence. Physical abuse gradually became a part of Lindsay's life. To control her and protect his reputation, Mitchell started limiting her interactions with others. He began by restricting her contact with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and eventually with her family. Lindsay, unhappy and fearful of being caught and punished, tried to secretly maintain contact with her loved ones. Despite the problems in their relationship, Lindsay stayed with Mitchell. One reason was the comfortable life he provided. He had a good income, supported her and their child, and paid the bills, leaving her without any financial worries. Lindsay's life changed dramatically when she found herself pregnant again. Although her husband, Mitchell, was a good father to her daughter from a previous relationship, she felt that having another child would be unwise in their current circumstances. She decided to have an abortion. When Mitchell found out about her decision, he became furious and verbally and physically abused her. Lindsay packed her belongings and took her daughter to her parents' home. Her family was relieved to see her. At first, Lindsay was happy to be apart from her husband, Mitchell. But over time, she started to miss him. Mitchell, eager to win her back, would call her constantly, begging her to return. Despite initial reservations, Lindsay was eventually won over by Mitchell's claims that he had changed. Everything seems to be back to normal, they are even looking forward to another child. However, their happiness was short-lived. After 6 months, Mitchell's violent temper flared up again. Although he didn't harm Lindsay, who was pregnant at the time, he unleashed his fury on their apartment. He smashed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and damaged the walls. He even threw their television out the window and vandalized their car. The landlord, fed up with the destruction, demanded that they pay for the damages and move out. The family's financial situation became even more dire. As a result, they was forced to take out a significant loan and downsize to a smaller, more modest apartment. In October 1997, Lindsay gave birth to their son, Jack. Mitchell was overjoyed at the arrival of his child. However, the relationship between the spouses continued to deteriorate over time. Mitchell often left home for extended periods, sometimes for just a few days, sometimes for an entire week, frequently citing trivial or made-up reasons. Although Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, she eventually reached her breaking point and filed for divorce, returning to her parents' home when Mitchell abandoned her once again. Lindsay realized she couldn't handle the separation from Mitchell on her own, so she reached out to a local charity that supports women in crisis. The charity helped her find affordable housing in a different city, allowing her to start fresh. However, she was worried that Mitchell would find out her new contact information, so she took steps to protect herself. When Mitchell began making threats, she took it a step further and got a restraining order from the police. With the help of a therapist, Lindsay started rebuilding her life. She kept a journal to document her experiences, intending to use it as a warning for her children in the future, so they wouldn't make the same mistakes she did. The journal entries supported what her relatives had said about the problems within the family. Unfortunately, despite her efforts to stay hidden, Mitchell eventually discovered her phone number and began calling her constantly, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, now free, soon felt lonely and couldn't resist her ex's persistence. They started talking and seeing each other again, eventually moving back in together. Ashamed of her weakness, Lindsay kept this a secret, but it eventually came out. Her relatives and friends were shocked and disappointed by her reunion with he they considered a tyrant, and they couldn't understand why she had taken him back. Her relatives continued to dislike Mitchell and cut off most communication with him. Despite their efforts to help her, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. As a result, her loved ones eventually gave up trying to save her, accepting the situation and distancing themselves. This time, however, Lindsay's decision would prove to have devastating consequences. After Lindsay disclosed her situation, a social worker began monitoring the young family. However, the social worker reported that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband, Mitchell, would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. Despite the social worker's repeated requests to speak directly with Lindsay, Mitchell would make excuses and prevent her from doing so. The social worker would leave her contact information, but Lindsay never returned her calls. The social worker became concerned for Lindsay's safety and requested a welfare check. When law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, they too were unable to speak with Lindsay. Mitchell claimed that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but he did not consider her missing. Mitchell said that Lindsay participated in a party with a friend on Christmas Eve, returning home early in the morning somewhat intoxicated. This led to an argument with Mitchell. Following the argument, Lindsay packed her belongings and left without saying goodbye to the children. Mitchell claimed Lindsay had left him for another man and no longer wanted to have any contact with him. Mitchell's subsequent media appearances sparked widespread attention. He presented himself as a worried and abandoned husband, pleading for Lindsay to return. However, during these interviews, he also shared intimate details about their marriage, occasionally speaking negatively about his wife. Mitchell believes that Lindsay's actions stemmed from a desire for a lavish lifestyle. He said to have seen her driving an expensive car, which he thought was proof that she had left their children for a wealthy man. Despite her public image, Mitchell was enjoying the freedom of a single life. The search for Lindsay began with conversations with her relatives. During these conversations, it was learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th. At that time, She appeared to be in high spirits and looking well, with her behavior being normal. During their investigation, detectives were surprised that no one had expressed concern about the young wife's whereabouts for 2 months. However, they soon discovered a plausible explanation. Mitchell had a history of limiting his wife's interactions with others, even close relatives. In the past, her family had difficulty staying in touch with her due to Mitchell's controlling behavior, which made it more believable that Lindsay had intentionally kept a low profile for an extended period. The news of Lindsay's disappearance alarmed everyone, despite the initial assumption that she was not the type to be concerned about. She was known for her modest lifestyle and never drank. Additionally, her husband had restricted her from having any contact with the outside world, including friends and acquaintances. Several inconsistencies in Mitchell's statement to the police raised suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would willingly let his wife leave, and that Lindsay would not abandon her children to a controlling husband. To clarify the situation, the police conducted a thorough investigation, interviewing all of Lindsay's acquaintances and searching for anyone who may have seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned their neighbors and obtained surveillance footage from the residential complex and surrounding areas. Lindsay's disappearance was not immediately noticed, and by the time it was. However, investigators later discovered that she was last seen in person on December 15th at the local post office, where she sent several letters and postcards. Her older sister confirmed that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. During their brief conversation over tea, Lindsay handed her sister a note and asked her to read it later. Unfortunately, the sister forgot about the note in her purse and was unable to find it later, leaving its contents a mystery. As the months passed, investigators grew increasingly suspicious that she was no longer alive, given her prolonged absence and lack of contact. Although they couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient evidence, their suspicions about him intensified as they learned more about their history and relationship. Lindsay's parents and detectives suspected Mitchell was involved in her disappearance, but lacked concrete evidence. Searches at their home and nearby turned up nothing. In a televised interview, Mitchell denied any wrongdoing, even claiming Lindsay's family would eventually apologize for suspecting him. Just before the holidays, Mitchell sent a postcard and hair dye to the lead investigator. The postcard's sarcastic message mocked the detective, implying he needed confidence and to cover his gray hair. This gesture showcased Mitchell's arrogance, despite portraying himself as a victim in the media. The investigation team held an interview to clarify some aspects of the case, but they didn't reveal all the details. They suggested that Mitchell Key, a well-known family man, was not what he seemed to be. In 2000, Mitchell Key found himself at the center of a scandal when it was discovered that he had been forging his wife's signature to claim social benefits. Although this revelation indirectly supported the theory that he was involved in Lindsay's disappearance, the investigators had trouble making progress due to Mitchell's popularity. Many people defended him, arguing that as a single father, he needed financial assistance. Despite this, the detectives were able to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was found guilty and sentenced to a month of community service. Mitchell's situation took a turn for the worse. The forged signature of his missing wife raised more than a few eyebrows, and the public's outrage grew. As the criticism mounted, Mitchell's composure began to fray, and he lashed out at the media for invading his personal life. In a groundbreaking development, a visitor to an amusement park on June 1, 2000, stumbled upon a disturbing discovery that rekindled the Lindsay disappearance case. Their dog's strange behavior near the roller coaster led to the discovery of human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the remains belonged to Lindsay, revealing she had been the victim of a violent crime. This breakthrough shifted the investigation's focus to finding the person responsible. On June 7th, Mitchell was questioned by detectives for over 36 hours, during which time he eventually cracked under the pressure and confessed to murdering and dismembering his wife. According to his testimony, Lindsay had asked for a divorce on December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister. This request enraged Mitchell, causing him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her body in their bedroom, taking steps to conceal the smell. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, Mitchell turned to his brother Elliot, a butcher, for assistance. Although Elliot was initially hesitant, Mitchell eventually convinced him to help. While their children played in the next room, the brothers dismembered Lindsay's body and later scattered her remains throughout the city. The murderer showed no remorse or empathy during his confession. Instead, he seemed to take pride in his actions, saying that without his confession, they would never have been able to prove his guilt. He then led the authorities to the locations where he had hidden the victim's body parts. Unfortunately, her head and one hand were never found. The forensic examination confirmed that all of those of Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Mitchell brothers took place in January 2001 and was a relatively straightforward process. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist observed that Mitchell displayed classic characteristics of a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. Elliot, Mitchell's brother, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in covering up the crime. Lindsay's children were taken care of by her grandparents, who gave them their last name. 3 months after the sentence, the Wilson family faced another tragedy when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the loss, took his own life in the family's attic. In his goodbye note, he expressed his desire to reunite with Lindsay, saying he saw no point in living in a world he considered cruel. As of 2017, Mitchell Key, Lindsay's murderer, became eligible for parole, but as of January 2023, his parole requests have been denied 3 times. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ilana Frick. Ilana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in Windsor, Ontario, to George and Anna, who had immigrated to Canada from Croatia in the early 1970s. She was the younger of 2 daughters, with an older sister named Caroline, with whom she was extremely close. Ilana's birth was considered a miracle by her parents. Her mother, Anna, had faced serious health complications after her first pregnancy, and doctors had told them that Anna would likely never conceive again. Anna and George made a significant effort to ensure their daughter's well-being and meet their needs, in spite of the difficulties they faced. They both worked at a car factory, striving to give Ilana and Caroline a good education and a comfortable life. Growing up, Ilana was a diligent and passionate student. She spent most of her free time reading, also found time to attend dance classes, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field events. During her summer breaks, Ilana chose to work to help support her family, often working in cornfields and learning to manage her finances wisely. As she progressed through school, Ilana excelled in math and science, and by the time she reached high school, she had set her sights on a career in medicine. Ilana graduated at the top of her high school class and was accepted into a prestigious medical university. Around the same time, she started dating Matthew Ryan, a classmate from high school who was also studying in the same department. They maintained a long-distance relationship after graduation, with Ilana moving to Ottawa to pursue a residency program at the university. Matthew, on the other hand, chose to work at a local hospital and did not pursue further education. Despite the distance, Ilana and Matthew's relationship continued until nearly 2002. They had even made plans to get married, but ultimately decided to remain friends. By then, Ilana was interning at a top clinic and was working towards earning a doctorate, while Matthew's career had not advanced. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Elena met Mohammed Shamji, a new colleague. She was immediately drawn to him. Mohammed, who was just a year older than Elena, was a resident in the neurosurgery department and came from a family of prominent doctors. Mohammed Shamji was born and raised in Ottawa, Ontario, into a family of medical professionals. His father, Farid Shamji, was a well-known surgeon, and his mother, Edith, was a talented psychiatrist. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, also pursued a career in medicine, becoming a medical biophysicist. Both brothers attended Yale University, and later, Mohammed returned to Canada to earn his doctoral degree from the University of Western Ontario. Additionally, Mohammed had taken an interest in a blonde woman, but at first, he did not make any attempts to approach her. Ilana was immediately drawn to Mohammed, a tall, dark-skinned man, and sought to capture his attention. He eventually asked for her number and initiated contact, marking the beginning of their romance. Initially, Ilana perceived Mohammed as a reserved individual who hesitated on dates, jumped between topics, or fell silent, giving the impression of being introverted. However, it was later discovered that his behavior was not due to shyness but rather a lack of interest. Unbeknownst to Ilana, Mohammed was seeing another woman at the time and intentionally kept this a secret. When Ilana discovered she had a rival, she became resolute in her determination to be the only woman in his life. The first year of their relationship was tumultuous, with they breaking up on 3 separate occasions, rekindling. This was largely due to Ilana's persistence in pursuing the relationship. Despite her parents' awareness of the issues and their encouragement to leave Mohammed, Ilana remained resolute, convinced that she had found her soulmate. Ilana often showered Mohammed with gifts, surprises, and home-cooked meals, but he only sporadically reciprocated her affection. Mohammed seemed content to accept Ilana's displays of love without feeling obligated to return them. This dynamic created an emotional imbalance, where Ilana grew increasingly dependent on Mohammed. In the summer of 2004, Ilana and Mohammed received unexpected news: Ilana unplanned pregnancy. A sudden life-changing event forced them to rethink their future plans. While both were anxious about the news, Mohammed felt a strong obligation to marry Ilana before the baby was born, as is traditional in his conservative Muslim upbringing. In September 2004, they had a 2-part wedding. The first ceremony adhered to Mohammed's family's cultural customs, while the second was a more casual celebration with friends at a popular restaurant. At the time, the newlyweds seemed happy and in love. However, their happiness was short-lived. When their daughter, Yasmin, was born in January 2005, their marital problems became apparent. Mohammed's focus on his career and education left Ilana and their newborn daughter feeling neglected. To make matters worse, Mohammed had been hoping for a son and wasn't afraid to express his disappointment. This marked the beginning of a troubled marriage that would ultimately end in tragedy. After having her child, Ilana took maternity leave to care for her daughter and manage the household. When Mohammed returned home, he would often go straight to his room and spend very little time with his wife and children, which left Ilana feeling abandoned and unappreciated. As time passed, Mohammed's behavior worsened, and he became increasingly critical and abusive. He would insult Ilana's appearance, refuse to eat her cooking, berating and insulting his wife. Despite her growing unhappiness, Ilana chose not to confide in anyone, including her close friends and parents, about her marital problems. However, one day, while Ilana was on the phone with her mother, Mohammed returned home in a bad mood and began berating Ilana in front of her mother. Ilana's mother tried to defend her, but Mohammed shifted the blame onto Ilana, claiming she was responsible for their troubled marriage. Ilana's mother advised her to end the relationship with Mohammed and file for divorce, but Ilana declined, hoping that she could still salvage the marriage. Unfortunately, Mohammed's actions worsened, and he started physically harming Ilana on top of the verbal abuse she had already been enduring. The situation reached a boiling point in the summer of 2005 when Muhammad punched Ilana in the face, breaking her nose. Fearing for her safety and that of her child, Ilana fled to friends and reported the incident to the police, finally deciding to end the marriage and leave Muhammad for good. Muhammad surprisingly begged his wife, Ilana, to come back, vowing to never physically abuse her again or even raise his voice. He promised that their family life would be perfect and he would control his temper. However, Muhammad's sudden change of heart was motivated by self-interest. As a young neurosurgeon, he was about to start at Duke University, working towards his doctorate, and a criminal conviction would ruin his promising medical career. Muhammad's primary concern was his own future, but he successfully convinced Ilana to drop the charges against him. She even agreed to follow him to North Carolina, where he would pursue his studies. Ilana's loved ones were confused when she didn't leave her husband despite the difficulties she was facing. Instead, she moved to another country with Muhammad. When they encouraged her to reconsider, she stood her ground. When the family settled in the US, life appeared more tranquil for a time. Muhammad earned a highly competitive spot in an elite engineering program. Meanwhile, Ilana joined Duke University on a full tuition scholarship. Their relationship grew stronger and became more confident in their decision to have more children. After the arrival of their daughter Fiza, they welcomed another child. Unlike their son's relatively smooth birth, Fiza's delivery was more challenging. The new addition to the family brought immense joy, and they felt grateful for their family growing closer. What secrets lay hidden behind the perfect facade of this family? In the late summer of 2009, Ilana and her husband, along with their children, returned to Ottawa, Canada, and settled back into their home. Ilana, however, soon ended her maternity leave and secured a job as a family doctor at a renowned hospital, quickly building a solid reputation. Her husband, meanwhile, juggled work, studies, and teaching at a university. As social media gained popularity in the late 2000s, they started a personal blog that portrayed them as an ideal family. They shared photos of their vacations, accomplishments in science, and luxury lifestyle, complete with a lavish home. They even posted about attending prestigious conferences and trendy resorts. To outsiders, they seemed like a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems. However, this perfect image hid a dark reality. Behind closed doors, Muhammad continued to exert strict control over Ilana. He monitored her interactions, dictated what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods, leaving Ilana feeling silent and trapped. As time passed, the tension and aggression between them became stressed, with Muhammad frequently yelling at Ilana and blaming her for their arguments and discord. In 2011, a prestigious medical center in Calgary offered a talented neurosurgeon, Muhammad, a fellowship in spinal surgery. Muhammad accepted the offer and relocated to Calgary, but he had to leave his family in Ottawa because his wife, Ilana, couldn't take a leave of absence from her job for over a year. They had to manage a long-distance relationship. During one of Muhammad's visits home, their relationship faced its biggest challenge yet. While at home, Muhammad accidentally left his laptop open, and Ilana saw a message from another woman on his social media account. The content of the message implied a romantic involvement. When Ilana confronted Muhammad, he confessed to having an affair, which was a devastating blow to Ilana. Ilana's family believed that this was the final straw, and they were convinced that she wouldn't forgive Muhammad again. However, Ilana decided to give their marriage another chance. Muhammad promised to end the affair, and they decided to start fresh in Toronto, where Muhammad had secured a high-paying job. Despite this fresh start, their marital issues persisted. After their move to Toronto, Muhammad expressed his desire to have a son, and Ilana agreed to try again, hoping that a new child would bring stability to their family. In October 2013, they had a son named Marius, a long-awaited addition to their family. Despite the new baby, his behavior towards his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, he devoted himself to his medical career, becoming a skilled and respected neurosurgeon known for his ability to tackle complex cases that other doctors avoided. Meanwhile, the wife also advanced in her career, becoming a representative for the Ontario Medical Association. However, the tension between them began to escalate, and his behavior towards his wife became increasingly aggressive. He went beyond verbal abuse, resorting to physical violence against her. During a family ski trip, the wife suffered a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, as well as other injuries. She initially claimed that the injuries were a result of a skiing accident. However, she later confided in her best friend that the injuries were actually inflicted by her husband. Following another heated argument over his latest infidelity, Ilana discovered that her husband, Mohammed, was having an affair with a colleague. After overhearing a suspicious phone conversation, Ilana confronted him, which led to a violent outburst, and he physically abused her. A friend, who was aware of the situation, advised Ilana to end her marriage, but she refused. Her friend jokingly suggested that Ilana should retaliate by having an affair of her own. Although the suggestion was made in jest, Ilana might have considered it a viable option to get back at her unfaithful husband. During the summer of 2016, their relationship continued to deteriorate. Their children were away at camp or staying with their grandparents, leaving Ilana and Mohammed to face their marital problems alone. In a surprising turn of events, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary in early September, even sharing the news on social media. However, their happiness was short-lived, as they began discussing divorce just a week later. Despite his marital transgressions, Mohammed refused to acknowledge his actions as grounds for divorce, claiming that he was happy with his current situation. On the other hand, a desperate Ilana initiated an affair with a coworker who had been flirting with her, escalating their relationship turmoil. Elena found herself swept up in a new romance, feeling cherished and adored by her partner. This was a welcome change from her current situation, and she reveled in the long-absent sensation of being loved and desired. However, her personal life was about to take a dramatic turn. A fierce argument erupted in the family on November 25, 2016. Elena informed her husband that their divorce was unavoidable. The following day, she consulted with a divorce attorney and then departed for a 3-day medical conference in another city. While Elena was away, her husband, Mohammed, sent her a series of messages, begging her to reconsider and work on saving their marriage for the sake of their children. Elena returned home on November 30th and made a final phone call to her parents. Although her voice betrayed some anxiety, she reassured them that everything was okay. Unbeknownst to her family, Elena had attempted to call the police that evening, but in her distress, she accidentally misdialed the number, leading to a devastating outcome. On December 1st, Anna tried to contact her daughter Ilana but was unable to reach her. Concerned, Anna called her son-in-law Mohammed to ask what was wrong. Mohammed claimed that Ilana had packed her bags in the middle of the night and left him and their children to be with her lover. However, Anna and her husband were skeptical of Mohammed's story, knowing that their daughter would never abandon her children. They asked a close friend of Ilana's to keep an eye on the Mohammed home while they traveled to Toronto to report Ilana's disappearance to the police. The friend reported that Ilana's car was still parked in the driveway, which only added to the family's concern. When Anna and her husband arrived at their daughter's house, they didn't notice anything out of the ordinary at first. However, Mohammed was agitated and insisted that Ilana was with her lover, repeating the same story he had told the police earlier. After Ilana was reported missing, a shocking discovery was made. The police found a body inside a suitcase. A man walking his dog by the river on December 2nd noticed a new-looking suitcase under a bridge about 24 miles from the suspect Muhammad's home. His curiosity got the best of him, so he opened the suitcase, discovering the body of a blonde woman. The police were immediately notified, and the body was taken to the medical examiner for identification and analysis. Fortunately, identifying the owner of the suitcase was not difficult because the perpetrator had left the luggage tag attached, which still had her name and travel information from her recent trip. Her parents confirmed the identity as Ilana. An autopsy revealed her cause of death to be mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. Additionally, her body showed signs of abuse with multiple bruises and abrasions. Notably, the victim was found dressed in pajamas with no shoes. Considering the victim's position in clothes, it appears she was placed inside the suitcase immediately after her death. The investigation led to the suspect's arrest later that evening at a coffee shop. Evidence indicated he was planning to leave the country. A lawyer accompanied the suspect during his meeting at the time of arrest. However, law enforcement thwarted the escape. Subsequently, Muhammad, the prime witness turned suspect, was arrested, formally charging him with Ilana's first-degree murder. Muhammad denied any involvement in the incident, but a disturbing detail soon came to light. Their 12-year-old daughter, Yasmin, had unintentionally witnessed her mother's murder. Yasmin reported hearing screams and noise coming from her parents' room, prompting her to rush there. She opened the door slightly and saw her father kneeling behind the bed, while her mother was likely on the floor, out of her sight. Muhammad ordered Yasmin to leave the room immediately, shut the door, and go back to bed. The next morning, he told his daughters that their mother had left. Despite her young age, Yasmin sensed that something terrible had occurred, but she couldn't fathom that her father was responsible for her mother's death. To avoid putting his daughter through the trauma of testifying in court, the accused confessed to the crime. He recounted the events of that fateful evening, stating that he and his wife had argued over her alleged infidelity and desire for a divorce. Muhammad claimed that he didn't intend to harm his wife, but the situation escalated rapidly. The argument turned violent, and when his wife tried to call the police, he knocked the phone out of her hand. She began screaming, and Muhammad struck her multiple times in the face before pinning her to the floor and strangling her with his hands. Muhammad's daughter entered the room, but couldn't see what had happened behind the bed. By the time Muhammad realized his wife was not breathing, it was too late. In a desperate attempt to revive her, he made a fatal mistake, breaking her neck. Panicked, he placed her body in a large suitcase and drove around for hours, unsure of what to do. Eventually, he stopped at a small bridge over a river and threw the suitcase into the water, hoping the current would carry it away. However, the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation, hidden in the darkness. During the trial of the surgeon, a scandal emerged involving his father, Ferd Shamji. The elderly man made derogatory comments about his deceased daughter-in-law, trying to justify his son's actions by claiming she had been unfaithful and provoked him. As a result, his medical license was revoked. Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder in April 2019 and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he may be eligible for parole in 14 years, considering the time he served during the trial. This means he could be released as early as 2030. Additionally, Muhammad was prohibited from contacting his children or his wife's parents and was ordered to pay them a substantial amount of compensation. His medical license was also permanently revoked, preventing him from practicing medicine or teaching again. The children who have lost their parents are now being cared for by Ilana's parents.